Hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be back for the fourth season of our series on AI. And this season, the theme is AI in the wild. Should it be tamed or run free? Uh, we've seen AI be successfully used in multiple, sometimes isolated parts of the business for years, and sometimes with little or inconsistent governance or corporate oversight. With the arrival of ChatGPT and the generative AI models, um, which are accessible by almost everyone, these large language models have really burst into every kind of department, tasked with everything from writing code to directly interacting with customers. Given the high profile ChatGPT wins and some failures, right, it's brought in some urgency to a question. And that question really is, should organizations be governing AI or not, and how? And I'm going to have four different guests, and I'm looking forward to speaking to each of them to get their perspectives on this topic. For this first episode, it's my very great pleasure to be joined by Shana Simmons, Chief Legal Officer at Everlaw. Shana leads the legal department at Everlaw and is responsible for all legal, regulatory, privacy, governance, risk, and compliance issues across the company. I want to thank you, Shana, for joining us today.
Scott, the pleasure is all mine. Thank you for having me here today. And I cannot believe that we have lawyers speaking about generative AI, and I'm one of the first guests. So I'm so excited that the legal profession finally is on the vanguard of something great in technology.
Absolutely, it is, and I think it's super important that lawyers are part of this conversation. One of the things I'd like you maybe to just start with is just give everyone a brief summary of Everlaw's business, so that the listeners can acquaint themselves with the work that Everlaw does.
Yeah, so Everlaw is an e-discovery and litigation comprehensive platform software, and generative AI is built into our platform. But before, like, that sounds simple and easy, and I was describing it to someone the other day, and they said, "Well, what is e-discovery?" And I realized not everyone has the pleasure of being put on a legal hold and deposed, if you call it a pleasure. But
Yeah.
e-discovery is short for electronic discovery. It's the processing of identifying, collecting, and analyzing electronically stored information. So you think about all the emails that you send, your calendar invites, your snaps, your text messages, your Slacks, all documents that will be produced during litigation or investigations. And we have taken a thoughtful approach to how we've incorporated generative AI in our services.
Well, I'm looking forward to unpacking that, and certainly it's super important. And there's a lot of information there, right? All those different channels of communication that need to be kind of reviewed and summarized. And your company serves the legal industry, right? And what I've noticed as I look through all the different sort of publications put out about generative AI is that very often the legal industry is kind of in the headlines when it comes to generative AI. For example, like I've seen the generative AI could radically alter the practice of law. That was in The Economist, and we have law firms expect generative AI to replace jobs internally on law.com, and there's been a bunch of others. And you've worked in big law, and now you're the chief legal officer at Everlaw, which is a hot legal tech firm. So what's your perspective on the utility or how ChatGPT or the large language models are going to be used, affecting both firms and that are providing services and in-house legal teams as they continue their work in this age of generative AI?
You're right. The headlines are varied, and I think some are even radical. And that's what you expect when you see any new event. You've been in the industry for years now of technology. So I've been in big law. I've been in-house at Google, and now the chief legal officer at Everlaw, where we're selling to legal teams of all types. So my perspective on LLMs general and just any generative AI is probably a little bit more positive than the average lawyer, I'll say, given all that I've seen in my career. I remember when I was at Google Cloud and we were starting to sell cloud to just the financial services industries. And so that was a shift then to move folks from on-prem to the cloud. So I think what you have is you have a number of firms that are generally curious about generative AI, but are proceeding cautiously. They are thinking about confidentiality. They're thinking about security. They're also thinking about their own jobs, right? The value of a lawyer in most firms, the way the economics work, is they're paid for their time. They're paid by the hours. They've paid by the 6-minute increments. It's one of the things that frustrates most business people. If I asked you a quick question, it was 6 minutes and it's cost me, $700. And so it's a way that they're thinking about, and they're going to have to shift how they bring their value to their customers. So I think that it's generally a place where they're thinking about in-house legal teams. And I might be a bit biased because I'm on the West Coast. I'm in tech. I'm speaking to other GCs in tech. I think they're more welcome of generative AI in this economy. In-house legal teams have a pressure to find efficiencies. They've got to figure out how to scale. I know every conversation I have with my CFO is, how can I do more with less resources in all sides? And so with that, we all know that the power, well, I think we not all, but generative AI, the reason why it's so hot, and you touched on this a bit, is that it's been consumerized. So we can have dinner with someone who might have used it. It's not just a developer AI tool anymore. It's something that consumers can use. So we all know that it can be powerful and things can be done quickly. So I just think that the conversation is evolving. And I think that we are going to all be pushed to figure out a way to use it smartly, and use it wisely. As a matter of fact, on November 16th, the State Bar of California has approved the practical guidance for the use of generative AI in the practice of law. So I think what we see is also state bars and even some judges giving us some direction on how to use it. So we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, no, I think, this evolution is probably the right way to look at it, right? I think it's been like a little mini series, watching all the developments with respect to the use and launches of these technologies. In some sense, people dealing and grappling with examples of hallucination, and people focused on how these models change in terms of their performance over time. And those grab headlines as much as the wow factor of all that it can do. But most definitely, an ability to improve efficiency and ensure that things aren't missed in many cases, right? By doing a thorough review is, I think, really important parts of the technology.
Well, I'd say this because what we also saw in the headlines is the Avianca case, right? Everyone knows it's a lawyer who used ChatGPT to write a brief, and in that he cited cases that didn't exist. But Scott, I'd like to urge us to think of it as, and I think people are beginning to speak about it, generative AI, any generative AI, I'm not going to just point to ChatGPT, should be used like you use an intern. Some interns are really great, and you might have to check their work, but a little bit less than you check other interns. But it is still part of our profession and part of our roles as professionals to check the work of folks who are working for us. And so I do think that needs to be part of how we think about using it responsibly.
I couldn't agree more, right? Essentially, a lot of times I'll talk about human in the loop, right? We can't give up our the normal processes you would have when we're provided advice or insight, right? And on top of that has to be some of the guardrails that organizations are thinking about when they apply these technologies. So with that as maybe going into the next question I have for you is I view Everlaw kind of in an interesting position, right? You have two different things you're focused on, right? Well, more, but two around this chat that I can see, right? ChatGPT technologies is one is, how do you govern your own employees' usage, right? And then two would be, how have you focused on, bringing this technology as a core part of the e-discovery platform? And maybe first, let's just talk about employees at the company and how they're encouraged to leverage generative AI, or maybe not encouraged. What's Everlaw's view on that?
I mean, generative AI, and some may disagree, it's one of the greatest technologies to make efficiency and scale since I think the advent of the internet. So Everlawyers, like many tech employees, have been curious about generative AI for years, right? Even when it was more of a thing of sci-fi than reality. And since the release of ChatGPT, we've seen employees use ChatGPT. Engineers inquire about Copilot as soon as it came out. Folks on any other team wondering how they can use it generally. So in April, our CEO, AJ, told all of our employees to use ChatGPT, but use it without sharing any customer or company confidential information, of course. And even that, it is on us to ensure that we are educating folks on what confidential information means. You'd be surprised that someone, because they think It is something that they might be able to find on the internet somewhere if they did a lot of sleuthing, that it's not considered confidential information to the company or to the person. So my team set out, we followed up with an announcement with a set of generative AI guidelines for using the tools internally that establish best practices for the innovation. So before I get to how we've built it into our company, would it be helpful to talk about how we thought about these guidelines?
Absolutely. Well, let's go there, right? Because I think I think most companies are struggling with that, or trying to figure out what those guidelines need to look like. Yeah. So yeah, please do tell us more about it.
I think for us, so being in tech for so long, and I know you're in data science, I know that I can't come in as the compliance or lawyer and just say, this is how we're going to do something, and this is why we're going to do it, and it's just going to change behavior, right? Good corporate compliance never really is a check the box to exercise. So what Yvonne did, my associate general counsel of product, and we sat down and really thought, okay, we have the framework in place of how we want the employees to use generative AI wisely, but how is it going to stick? And our CEO had written these manifestos that really were about the company's values long before the company became what it is. I joke around, I say, it was in your garage. He goes, Shana, it was in my bedroom, right? Like it was in the bedroom where you want these manifestos of how we operate. And so there's 3 principles that we wanted to follow in them, straight from our manifestos, which any of the long tenured employees or any employee who came because of the mission and the manifestos of the company can stand behind. And one, it was set our own bar, right? That's the company philosophy. How did I take this into generative AI? I said, well, we must set our own bar to use generative AI creatively to pursue excellence and responsibly. Even if companies do not, we must do that, right? So we've got to set our own bar. Next is respect for users. That's embodied in our manifestos. And so that means what I can do there, I'm like, okay, respect for users. Okay, that means we keep data privacy and security as top priorities, and we protect the data for our company, our customers, and also our employees, because employee privacy is also on. Then also in that respect for users, because we know judges are looking for lawyers to cite when they are using generative AI, we should also err on the side of transparency, and where appropriate, always denote the customer-facing AI features as such. Last is integrity and discipline. We must do the right thing and do it the right way to ensure long-term. That means carefully review an AI generative material for inaccurate or incomplete information. And of course, as a lawyer, potential infringement of third-party rights. Like just because ChatGPT put it doesn't mean that we might have the right to use it. So we gave these principles, and with that, we gave illustrative examples of responsible and sensible personal use to use it.
Well, I think that approach is perfect, right? Because you have to relate to what what the employees already understand, right? And then corporate values is something that they internalize, as you mentioned, right? It's this part, it fuses every part of their sort of being. But on top of that, right, then relating it to the use of generative AI. And I think each company and organization are probably, asking the same questions, right? Based on the business that they do. What are the responsible, ways to use that technology? And you mentioned responsibility. I think the other part that came through in some of your comments that I think is really important is this sort of need to educate, right? Again, or remind, right? Because you mentioned confidential information. We've seen IP leakage from engineers using it and not understanding maybe what is IP or what is confidential. And I think we're not used to necessarily interacting with these tools that could access the internet or could bring that information into a training corpus. And so, I think this sort of, I'm big on this focus of a corporate-wide sort of standards, right? So that we can aspire to a healthy sort of exploration or use of technology, and then help all the employees, right? It's almost like things like ethical AI. These are very deep and complicated, topics, right? Use of generative AI, probably its ease of use makes it one of the more dangerous things about it, right? And then reminding people that yes, superhuman, but not flawless, and in fact, reviewing that is important.
Yeah, and I think because the technology is powerful, we agree that the technology is powerful and good, But just because the technology is powerful and good doesn't mean that the company might be good and powerful. And
Yeah.
so then it's also grappling with an insurance. So we might have the policies in place, but we still have to do the vendor risk assessment and also figure out the business continuity plan should the company or technology not work. And so the way we're doing that is we evaluate these vendors as we would any. And I think, Scott, the financial services industry is probably where the rest of enterprise is going to go and how they think about vendor risk, right? When financial services are evaluating a material vendor to use, they are going into it with a partnership. They want to know that they have the right security, the right controls, the right business continuity, the right execs, the right key people, and that things are thought about. And so I think that the industry now, companies have to figure out that it's no longer just about the technology. It's got to be about the customer trust. It's got to be about following the customer trust, making sure you have the controls in place, but also you're relating to the customers. You are changing the terms that they need. So, for example, you know that customers need to know when you're using generative AI, that you have that transparency too for them, that customers need to be able to delete their data and rely on you to need to delete in their data. And you can do that. And what I've seen with the good LLMs is that they are growing up very quickly in front of our eyes. And it's not just about the technology, but their terms of service are changing, how they're thinking about IP. I mean, we now see some of these, these vendors saying, we're going to give you an IP for an IP indemnity, right? Like we're going to come out and do that now. And so I think it's about this customer trust and just getting to know the company you're doing business with just as well as your own guidelines as well.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. The vendor management, and then you having expectations, right? But from a business continuity perspective, but also from a trust perspective, right? And disclosing how it's used, the technologies are used or not used, is a really important part of that. So, yeah, and I have also seen, a lot more focus on it being a tool versus a curiosity, right? And I think Everlaw has been, an early mover in that, and maybe we could switch and talk a little bit about that e-discovery platform a little bit, and how we use the ChatGPT there. I mean, can you give us a little bit more detail, because that was the other sort of fork was, the product sort of usage, right? And you kind of talked a little bit about it in terms of the vendors and how you have relationships and expectations there. But can you tell us a little bit how that provides the benefits in the discovery?
Absolutely. So just following on that quickly, like we have the vendors, but we've made sure that whenever we're using generative AI, that we can switch LLM models easily, right? So we not become single source vendor dependent. So how we're building it is in order to do that. So I'd say we were not the first e-discovery software company to announce generative AI feature. We took a thoughtful approach to adopting generative AI in our services. And in July, we first launched Everlaw AI Assistant, which is built on powerful LLMs in beta. And we wanted to be thoughtful because we know that our customers are thoughtful, right? We wanted to ensure that we were building something that they can rely on and they can trust. So with Everlaw AI Assistant, it's integrated into 2 key workflows. And I went through the e-discovery and what that is. So the core review window, where doc by doc analysis is happening by attorneys, they're looking at their docs, they're tagging it for relevant information, and they're redacting it. So sometimes when lawyers have to produce something, they have to redact personal information or other things. And then there's this other component of litigation, which is drafting, narrative building, and drafting the story, drafting litigation, drafting your deposition questions, etc. And in the review workflow, you can use Everlaw AI Assistant to summarize documents powerfully, quickly. What would take hours is now taking minutes and seconds. You can ask open-ended questions of the documents, and the documents are just the corpus of documents that the customer has uploaded. So it's not going in, it's just what the customer has uploaded. And in Story Builder, you can use generative AI to help you craft the case narratives for us. So I think what's consistent is that human verification, as we talked about, is built into the core of the experience. We make it easy for the humans, the legal teams, to verify the output. And I think that's the right thing to do.
Great. And so they verified the output, and I'm sure you're helping with, essentially how they ask the questions, maybe give some best practices. Like we have all these concepts of prompt engineering and context and what have you. there's a lot of there's some science there, but there's a lot of art, right? And I'm sure that's a big part of it also. So in addition to leveraging the technology, how best to ask the questions, of the data. Yeah.
And quite frankly, I was thinking the other day, because I had someone say, well, what am I going to do? Right. I know I had a lawyer that I was talking to, a partner at a firm, and she shared, what makes me good is that I've just reviewed hundreds of these types of contracts. And so I have this information, and, now am I going to be necessary? And I said, well, you might become a really good prompt engineer. I was kidding, right? But that's like really the skill set as well that lawyers have, is to become we've always been very good prompt engineers. We've got to figure out the next question to ask.
Yeah. Well, I think you're onto something, because with AI, early applications were trying to really mimic experts, right? And if in anything else, it provides that boost for those years of learned experience, right? To kind of supercharge or power others to use it more effectively. So most definitely makes sense. I guess one last question, and then we'll wrap it up. I mean, the last question is, we've seen a lot of evolution, right? It's been, I mentioned, like, it's, a little bit like a mini series, and we've had the pausing generative AI sort of movement. We've seen different things occur in the space of generative AI. You just mentioned that you're seeing a lot more maturity and people talking about the need for better guardrails and processes, and human in the loop, which is core to the way that your software should be used and is used, right? Were there any things along that journey where philosophies changed or shifted, or has it been kind of just consistent in terms of the development within the e-discovery system? I know you mentioned you took a slow start, but I was just wondering, once you started, were there points where you paused? I don't think anyone's trying to. Yeah.
As we think about the technology and just kind of going up and doing more, it's really, even on some things, we're still using humans, right, to verify. So for example, we'll ensure that an engineer is verifying it. It's not done perfectly yet. Like, generative AI is good, but it's not perfect. And so I think that's why we're building it. I wouldn't say we're paused, we're building it slowly to ensure that we talked about customer trust, and it's about security and privacy, billing. As you know, there's so many things that go with customer trust, but also it's about getting it right? So if I'm asking the questions, how right is it? Because we don't want for us to launch something that isn't helpful to our customers. So I think it's more the continued slow growth instead of the launch and iterate, which we've never been a launch and iterate kind of company, because in this you cannot get it wrong, or you can't. The best way to say is half-ass it for the customers that we have.
Yeah, so being cautious and taking the time, and then, I think the other thing that came through in the conversation was the fact that they're very thoughtful around the framework for how people use it, and ensure that once those decisions get made, that they're codified and followed. And I think that's important in all parts of AI. Like in areas that I spend a lot of my time, like responsible AI. That we have auditability built in, right? So we develop a firm sort of process that we all follow. Let's say when we develop models with AI, they have to be followed. It has to be the certain type of algorithm. It has to be this certain type of test. The results have to be shown and validated and cross-checked. And so your point, right? These are things that we can't be wrong, and it can't be half-assed. And so from that perspective, we going and put in structure to make sure that things are followed. And ultimately, right, if things have to adjust and there's better practices down the road, right, that's something that can always be envisioned. But I do admire not jumping right into the bandwagon. I think we saw too many companies automatically, on day two, rebrand themselves as generative AI companies, kind of forsaking the fact that there's entirely other sort of focuses from an AI perspective or technology perspective, and this is really a tool, right, where we find the right sort of fit for. So,
and I think those companies, some of them, they jumped into the generative AI space, but they didn't build the controls and the proper foundation for their base technology first, right? And you've seen it with the advent of cloud and these privacy regulations, and how customers are thinking about security, that it's something that you have to build in, because now those procurement people are smarter about the right questions to ask. And so now, you're having to work backwards and think about how to build the proper foundation for using it.
Yeah, and God forbid in that process, if you're one of those fast movers, you lose customer trust, right? That's really hard to earn back, and that accountability is super important. So I think we're almost at the end of the time. So I have to ask you the question, although, based on this conversation, I think I probably understand how you're going to answer it. But so how would you answer the question? Should generative AI run wild, be used freely, or be tamed with rules and governance? What's your thoughts?
So I think the technology is powerful. I'm super optimistic. I'm an enthusiast optimist, I'd say, about this, but we need to use it responsibly. I think people want to use it, but they are also craving guidance to use it properly. At least I hope those in the legal industry are. That says, I think there needs to be a balance between regulation and innovation. The rules and governance should not stymie the growth, I feel. And I feel that at Everlaw, we're balancing the best of both worlds, allowing the generative AI to be used to drive innovation under a proper governance framework. But I do hope the regulators and the tech industry meet in the middle somewhere. And so I mean, we've seen it. We've seen some of the, we've watched some of what's happening in DC or what's happened in DC before. And there's just such a disconnect from the technology and the regulators that I am hoping that people like us, Scott and I, can somehow be these tech ambassadors with the regulators so that we can see rules that make sense for what we're doing.
I couldn't agree more, Shana. And I think regulation and innovation can coexist. And in fact, thoughtful, careful application is always kind of going to be one of the best ways to kind of demonstrate how to carefully use new technology. We're all going to move forward one way or another, and that focus on balancing the rules, the governance, and ensuring that we can innovate and bring new value to ourselves as corporations and our customers. Both can be met, right? I think that's one of the fallacies that people think it's a light switch. It's either one or the other, and in reality, right, it'll drive responsible innovation and practical applications. And it sounds like that's absolutely the path that you're on with Everlaw. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing your insights, Shana. It's been a great pleasure to kick off the series here. And really pleased to hear such a thoughtful application of generative AI being used already to enhance the work that Everlaw supports in terms of the legal field. So thank you.
Thank you, Scott. The pleasure is all mine. And one of the things I have to tell you is that I adore and appreciate the work that you've been doing with historically Black colleges. And I got to see and watch the interview with the folks at Bowie State. And I have a question for you, if that's okay.
Sure, please.
Because of your commitment to marginalized communities, how do you think generative AI can level the playing field?
That's a good question. So I think what generative AI can do from my perspective is it can provide an ability to bring more perspective more quickly on really thoughtful sort of questions. So like, for example, when talking with the Bowie State students, the topic was around ethical AI and bias in data, which is pervasive in our society. And, these young people, they had very, very thoughtful sort of questions. And so, being able to access and use generative AI as that tool to ask questions about, demographics and ask questions about historically how, let's say credit has been made accessible or not accessible, all really, really important. So I think it will be, a really important set of questions that can be answered in a way that might take a very long time to discover on their own, right? And then they can kind of form and make a lot more progress, being more effective in their communities, primarily by getting access to this information more rapidly and forming opinions. So I think it's going to up power in terms of just having this ability to expose more of the history and more of what the leading sort of thoughts are, so that they can take it and move it forward in their own work.
Thank you, Scott. I mean, that's one of the reasons I grew up poor in the Bronx, and I went to Google initially to work there for the first 9 years for 9 years in the enterprise space. And because of the mission to bring information to the world. And I still think that there's the power that you see in that to marginalized communities. So thank you for the work that you are doing and how you're
Oh,
doing.
it's my greatest pleasure. Thanks for bringing it up, Shana. I appreciate it.
Not a
All right.
problem.
Thanks again.
Take care.
Okay, bye.
Awesome. Here we
Cool.
are. There's Amber. Perfect.
How'd it go?